Welcome to Season 2 of Kindred, hosted by me, Kate, and my sister, Jen. In this podcast, we explore our human relationship to animals and the natural world.
In connecting to our world, we also connect to compassion, understanding, and empathy. How can we see ourselves not as separate from animals and nature, but part of an active ecosystem?
This season, Jen and I will focus on learning about the history of our disconnect to the natural world. What knowledge and connection have we lost and why?
We'll talk with scientists, conservationists, academics, and many others as we look to answer the question, how can we implement change in order to heal our planet?
And we'll explore how we can repair and restore our connection and relationship to our fellow keystone species and ecosystems. Hello and welcome to Kindred. I'm here with my sister Jenny. How are you today?
I am good.
Good.
How are you?
So upbeat.
So upbeat.
Yep.
The sun is shining. That's nice.
The sun is shining. It's a beautiful day. I'm well. It's nice to be back with everybody. We have a very exciting and interesting conversation coming up to you guys. And I just want to start. There's a lot to cover. So today we are going to be talking with Dr. Monique Udell out of Oregon State University. She's a scientist who works in the human-animal interaction and bond environment and really focuses this work on domestic animals such as dogs and cats. But I'll get back to her in a moment. Just want to do a few highlights for today. I wanted to tell you about a few rescues that are working hard to improve the experience of our domesticated animals and educating us on how best to care for them. So the first one I want to tell you guys is, these are all three, you can find them on Instagram, is Kitten X Lady. She's a rescue out of California, and she focuses primarily on teeny tinies, kittens and puppies. She is very focused on education and how to best raise and foster kittens and puppies from tiny. She has incubators, and she posts a lot on YouTube, so you can find her a lot of educational videos on YouTube. She also has a book or two out, but she's so good and just so much heart, and it's just the cute way she talks about the kittens and how she names them, and she's really pushing education, which is great.
It's nice that that's her niche, is very young, because if you don't start them out right, they have such a worse prognosis, you know?
Yeah, yep.
It's you can't just treat them like a 6-week-old kitten.
No, for sure. And I mean, I've done rescue with moms and kittens years ago, and you really need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's a lot of different, viruses and diseases they can get. So yeah, she's great. So check her out. The second rescue I wanted to talk to you about is called Kabul Animal Rescue. So they're on IG. They are Kabul_animal_rescue, and they're also on Facebook. They have an incredible story of when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. They were taking 200 plus animals to the airport trying to evacuate. And like with all rescue, there's a lot of heartbreak in all of these stories. And she was not able to get her charter planes in, and she had to release the dogs out at the airport. And she stayed, and but she has an incredible story. Please check them out. And there's many people working in this rescue.
Did they only start then? That was when they were born?
No, they've been working for a while.
Okay.
I think it was just in that mass panic of trying to save animals and people.
Yikes.
They're another amazing story. So please look into them. And then the other one that's a little closer to home for me, a friend of mine has worked for a long time with a woman named Turkan in Turkey. And she does a lot of rescue with dogs and cats. She's in veterinary medicine, and her Instagram handle is Baranak Malaysia. So that's BARINAK _MELEGI. Turkan is amazing, and she works tirelessly at pulling cats and kittens and dogs and puppies off the streets. And she's out of Eastern Turkey, but she's a wonderful, good, kind human. And the reason I'm talking about these second two rescues, I just want to highlight the fact that in every country there are people working really hard. There are just a lot of incredible people trying to support and help our domesticated animals.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really important to highlight rescues from other countries as well. And so please look up those 3 rescues. Again, that's Kitten X Lady on Instagram, and then Kabul _animal _rescue on Instagram and Facebook. And Turkan, which you can find her at Baranak _Malehe. And of course, as usual, all these links will also be in our show notes, so you can easily refer to those. Also, as per usual, it would mean so much if you guys could please follow, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. That would be great. Thanks so much in advance. Okay, so let's get to our conversation.
All right.
Yeah, today we are talking to Dr. Udell, who is the director of the Human-Animal Interaction Laboratory, and she teaches courses and conducts research on animal behavior, cognition, and human-animal interaction at Oregon State University. Her work focuses on human-animal interactions and bonding, including animal training and animal-assisted intervention programs aimed at improving the lives of humans and animals through mutually beneficial interactions. Additionally, Dr. Udell has a special interest in the social development and behavior of cats, dogs, and wolves. So, okay, let's head over to our conversation. Monique, welcome to Kindred. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so grateful to have you here and giving us a new understanding of our most beloved fur babies.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you about it.
Yeah, really excited. So can you just lead us into the conversation with how you would define the focus of your research?
So we do a number of things in our lab. One of the things that we focus on a lot is the human-animal bond. So trying to understand the relationship that people and animals share with one another and the things that contribute to that. And so on one side, we look a lot at animal cognition and animal behavior to really understand the animals that we interact with. And on the other side of things, we look deeply at the interactions and the relationship that people say they're sharing with animals and the relationship animals seem to be having with people, to try to understand how we can make those mutually beneficial.
So how does understanding the bonds we have with our domestic animals impact the quality of our relationship with them?
Yeah, I think we've just started really in the last several years focusing a lot more deeply on the quality of relationships. So even research that's focused on the bond and relationship between people and animals in years past has sometimes asked the question of, do animals have bonds towards people? But now I think we're starting to recognize that if we're going to be spending our lives with these animals, we're going to be bringing these animals into our homes, that we really need to understand the bond from their perspective as well. So we often know that we love our animals and that we feel bonded and that can benefit us. But the question about how does the animal perceive that relationship and what impacts does it have in the animal's day-to-day life, that's something that's sort of newly being explored. There are a number of groups that are studying this, and I think it's really promising because until we understand what the animal is experiencing, we can't really work towards improving those relationships.
I love that. It's such an amazing new focus, and it's just so important and exciting to hear what you're doing with that. And so why is our understanding so limited when we have been living with these animals for centuries? I mean, there's evidence of the human canine relationship from tens of thousands of years ago. And, not even getting into our feline friends, but what's the deal?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's actually one of the things that made me so intrigued about this area of study is that we've been living with dogs for at least 14,000 years. We've been living with cats for several thousand years at least. And in many of these instances, we've had close bonds for a very long time. And if you look in the archaeological record, we can see evidence of these relationships spanning back thousands of years. And there were scientists who were interested in these questions earlier in history. So Charles Darwin writes extensively on the relationship shared between him and his dog, and then also other people with their animals. And you do see it crop up from time to time in history. But I think that, where we are today, we have a different set of tools and a different set of perspectives on how we can ask questions and answer questions about these relationships. And I think something that has been lacking historically is there weren't as many experimental studies focused specifically on sort of the animal's experience and how they were responding to the behavior of the person. And I think now we're starting to ask questions that really give us answers about cause and effect, whereas in the past, a lot of the information was observational or correlational. So we knew that there was something going on. But now we're starting to ask, well, what specifically do humans do that make animals respond in a certain way towards them? And can we change that when it's not ideal? Can we make it better? And I think that's sort of what's new about our approach today.
Do you think it's partly just because of human beings sort of not being able to be as compassionate a lot of the time? And we just think of like very individual centric. Well, this is what works for me. I mean, I think of that in patterns with how we've treated other people over the years too. Just like this is what I want to have this dog. I want to own this dog. I want to love this dog. And we don't necessarily, I feel like it's good news about our evolution that maybe we're thinking, well, how does that work for that dog?
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of being able to take the perspective of others and have compassion and empathy for the perspective of others. I think that it's not necessarily new, but maybe it's a thing that we are now trying to integrate into the questions that we ask as scientists. So, I mean, if you read what Darwin wrote about his dog, he loved his dog, right? You can see that in those writings. And he had compassion for his animals. But I think, that's, the thinking about what they might experience and reading their behavior and writing that down has now grown into something where we're saying, well, how do we know? How do we know that gesture or that behavior on the part of my animal really means that they're experiencing something positive and isn't just our human-centric interpretation of it, kind of like what you're saying. And so we're digging a little deeper. And I think it's not so much that necessarily that we haven't cared or we haven't wanted to show love, but I think there's a greater understanding both on the side of how we interact with animals and how we interact with other people, that sometimes our own perspective is limited. And so we have to find ways of getting to that question that really takes the other individual's perspective into account better. And as humans, we often think we're really good at that.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's exactly my point. Well, I think people have always loved their animals, but just not maybe being aware of my love might not be what you need.
That's exactly right. Like, that's what we said too. Like, it turns out that me loving them is not enough.
Or like the way, like if I want to hug my dog or pat her head, she hates having her head patted. And some people just insist on doing it. And I say she doesn't like that, but that's how they want to love my dog. So that doesn't really feel that loving to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why this work is so exciting. It's so critical.
And you actually have data to back it up.
Really, like, what is their experience? But not just it's not just dogs, it's cats, horses. And then that goes into all of, the other conversation of any domesticated animal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really any animal that we're going to take on any care for. So also captive wildlife. I mean, if we're having an impact on these animals, if we don't understand their existence, we don't understand their way of perceiving the world, how can we be sure we're providing adequate care or meeting their needs. And I think that what we're realizing as a society and definitely as a scientific community is that we are just scratching the surface about how these animals communicate, how they process things, what they remember, what they feel. And so sometimes it's hard to find the best way to ask the right questions. But I think that there's an emphasis on trying hard to find ways to do that now. And I think that that's why we're learning so much more about these species and also about how we can improve their welfare. But, we've just begun this journey, even though it's been decades. I mean, that's in comparison to spans of thousands of years of caring for these species. And so we have a lot of work to do to fully understand them, but it's definitely promising that we're trying now.
So why now? What has changed, do you think, that has opened up the space for science to start looking into the human-animal bond?
Yeah, I think I think it really is about tools and knowledge, right? And I think we can look at other areas of science too and say the same thing. I mean, we've been interested in how the human mind works for a very long time, but now we have certain tools and technology and approaches, and we've learned enough that it's gotten to us a point where we can ask new questions. And I think the same is true when we think about, animal cognition, animal behavior, reasoning. We've gotten to a point where we've started to figure some of this stuff out. Even just understanding how humans work and human behavior and human minds, even though we are human and we have that personal experience to maybe guide some of the way we ask questions, we're still trying to figure that out. And so to ask those questions of other species that we don't know as much about, it takes a little bit longer sometimes. The study of cat cognition, for example, and cat behavior has lagged behind dog cognition and behavior for a while. And there's a few reasons that might be. But one of the challenges that I experienced personally when I first started wanting to work with cats is that we knew much less about how to motivate cats, about sort of the pattern of how to even get them to participate in our cognitive tests. And it was often very clear that they were solving these problems, but it was sort of our failure to have the motivational structure in our methodology to get them to answer the questions that we were asking them. Yeah, and we found ways to do that better now, and hopefully we keep improving. But, I think with dogs, we had gotten to a point sort of in our history where we had learned so much about how to train dogs and motivate dogs and interact with dogs that studying them became that much easier. And so now we have to put the same level of focus on these other species and say, okay, what does motivate them? What do they like and what do they not like? Before we can even ask the more complex questions, because we need them to be motivated to answer those questions.
So in reading your studies, I've noticed you use the term caregiver as opposed to owner. Why did you choose the term caregiver?
So this is an intentional shift that we've been starting to implement, both myself and others in our lab group over the past couple of years, really. And I think that, the motivation behind it, the fundamental motivation is to really think about the kinds of relationships that we're talking about. Through conversations with others in the field and through experiences with reviewers and just seeing the different perspectives on terminology used, it became clear, I think at some point, it just sort of clicked that when we're using the term owner, that implies a very different kind of relationship than when we use a term like companion or caretaker. Instead of viewing these other individuals as, equals or individuals that we should be, concerned for their welfare, when we use the term owner, it puts them more in the classification of property. Although as a society, we often, that's sort of how they end up being treated and classified. If we're trying to understand the relationships we share with them, we're trying to improve their welfare, then that might not be the best approach. We might want to call them the type of name that represents the kind of relationship that we're striving to understand.
I think we are starting to understand that language is, well, we've always known language is important, but how we use it, especially in science in such focused ways, I think it's so critical to change those terms. And you're exactly right. Owner means ownership and property. And coming from the caregiver, caretaker, it changes the whole thing immediately and allows and makes space for what does that relationship mean?
It feels
and how does
much
it
more
look like?
respectful, I would say. And I think that's the thing that I keep thinking is that what we've learned is we actually aren't just the apex of everything, and that we, in terms of all animals, like Monique was saying, I was telling my sister about working at a wildlife clinic where it was very clear from the beginning of the training that I got there is these are wild animals. It's not if you're working here so you can take pictures with the little bunny rabbit and put it on your Instagram or cuddle with a baby squirrel, this is not the job for you.
Not the job.
Because that's not what they want from us.
Baby squirrels don't want to cuddle with you.
And that's not respectful. And that's what I loved was that we'd cover the cages. When we were in the room, if we had to talk, we talked as quietly and as briefly as possible. Just this idea of instead of just how we just come in and just want to be however we want to be. Just that this whole thing we're talking about seems a lot about not only getting more information, but doing it from a place of respect.
Yeah, and giving them agency and personage. Right. And it does just change it suddenly. And respect, like you say. It's so true. Speaking of wildlife, this makes me think about when we talked earlier, you had mentioned working with wolves at a sanctuary. Tell us a bit about your work with wolves and what does it tell us about our dog's domestic experience?
Yeah, so I've worked with wolves in a number of settings. Where I've done the most work is actually at a wolf research and education facility in Battleground, Indiana called Wolf Park. And they do an incredible job of raising wolves. They're in captivity. They're going to be in captivity their whole lives, but they're heavily socialized to people from a young age. And this is important for a number of reasons. One, because it really facilitates the type of education and research missions that they're striving for. We can ask questions with them that you wouldn't be able to ask with wolves that hadn't been socialized, but also they're going to be around people their whole lives. And so to not be stressed on people is a really important thing. And so really one of the things that we did when we started out there is that there had been all this research early on about what is it that's making dogs special. And one of the things that was thought to be sort of the crux of what was making dogs special was their ability to respond to social cues that people were giving. So follow points, follow gestures, gaze. And after a few years of this and sort of working in that area, trying to understand lifetime experiences that contributed to things like gesture responsiveness in dogs, we were contacted by Wolf Park, and the folks there said, hey, we have wolves here that can absolutely do the things that you're talking about. They can follow points, they can respond to gaze. And so we went and we tested it, and sure enough, they could do it just as well as dogs. In some cases, they actually outperformed dogs on these gestures. And I think that was the start for me of understanding that, to understand whether or not something sort of is unique to a species or inherent to species, you have to look outside that species as well. And you have to look into populations that are different from the population you're typically working with. And I think one of the things that it's taught us is that, wolves and other non-domesticated species often have these really intense social structures where they can respond to gestures, they can respond to these types of cues. But fundamentally, what seems to be different about dogs and wolves is just the amount of time dogs spend intently focused on social stimuli, and not just people, but on social companions in general. And it makes sense because what wolves do is something that you'd expect from adult mammals, which is they'll come and they'll greet you if they're socialized to people. They'll be very friendly. If you're doing things that matter to them, like you're giving them treats, they're going to stick around. But if you kind of start ignoring them, the social interaction is over. They'll go back to their normal day-to-day business. Dogs, on average, not all dogs, but on average, they tend to persist in that social interaction even once we've stopped responding. So you can ignore a dog for up to 2 minutes and they might still be there sort of begging from you or looking into your eyes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that's much more like what we see from juveniles of species. So children are more likely to do that than an adult human, and we see that across a wide range of species. And so I think what it's done is given us some perspective on what things are sort of different about dogs through this evolutionary process and what things are learned through lifetime experience. And both of those bits of information are really important to a deeper understanding of dogs and how we can make our relationships better with them.
Yeah, so interesting. So to switch gears a little bit, in light of the work you've done with wolves, it makes me think about how might your research impact conservation and the human wildlife conflict? I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's sort of two sides of this that could potentially be helpful. One, I think if we're just being more mindful about animals in general, even if that's, the animals living in our homes, like dogs or cats, and we're taking the perspective of the other species and we're asking questions about the perspective of other species, it might make us as a society more mindful of species that extend beyond our household. So ultimately, it can potentially shift some of that focus to, this understanding that extends beyond our own personal human experience. But it also provides information about, ways to approach these sorts of questions that could be mutually beneficial in other contexts. So not only do I work with companion animals, but I'm now in an animal science department. I also work a lot in sort of production and farm animals. And I have done some work in conservation. And one of the key things that sort of I've learned through this process and in talking with other people that they've learned as well, is that typically the best solutions to the problems that we face are mutually beneficial. So if we're thinking about wolves, obviously it's not ideal for wolves to be attacking livestock or hunting livestock. And it's not ideal for those that are raising livestock to have wolves encroaching.
Right.
But finding solutions for conservation for those wolves so they're getting their needs met in other ways or have resources in other ways that also keeps them away from livestock, there's room for solutions in there that are going to benefit everybody. And the same is true when we're working with production animals. Production animals that have better welfare are going to not only live better lives, but are also going to produce better in the long run. It's also going to be a better place for those that work on farms or in those production settings. It's going to be better for them because they're going to have better experiences and there's going to be general better welfare, ease of care. And then in our homes, the same applies, that
Right.
Improving the welfare of our animals is not only good for the animals, and I think we should care about that for the animals' own sakes, but it also improves the relationship we have with them and ultimately improves our lives as well. And so I think on all these fronts, there are parallels about how really caring about other species is not only beneficial for them, but it's also critical for us.
Absolutely. And I think we talk a lot about that here in the podcast, that, again, back to your understanding their experience and how they operate within our ecosystems and how we interact. It doesn't at all have to be a human, wildlife conflict. It can be a human wildlife interaction or experience where it is always mutually beneficial. We've just, I think, forgotten what that looks like and what that means. And when we don't understand something, we tend to fear it. So to keep on with wolves, we're afraid of wolves, or they threaten our homes, or they threaten our livestock. So we have reaction to that instead of responding to a situation because we don't understand them. And I think it just goes across the board from, it's like having a bird in a cage in your house. Like if you understand the experience of the bird, you might not have a bird in a cage in your house. Or how can you create an environment where it's better for that bird? Or, across the board, and we talk about domesticated animals. And I think, to me, I don't consider birds and snakes and things like that domesticated animals. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? What do you term domestic animals or wildlife?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question. It's actually one that isn't even well clarified in science to some extent. So one of the definitions of domesticated animals that I tend to use, and that I really believe is probably sort of the gold standard, is that a domesticated animal is not just one that is living with us in their lifetime, but has actually undergone genetic change over generations, that has led to, genetic, morphological, physiological changes from its wild type counterpart. And so for dogs and cats and sheep and cows, we look at those animals, it's not just that they live with us and so they're domesticated. And it's not that, we've raised them in our homes when we're talking about companion animals, so they're domesticated. It's that they actually are different from their wild type relatives on a genetic level. And those differences do things like reduce flight distance. They tend to increase critical periods for socialization. They do things that make it easier for them to function in human-governed environments. So that doesn't mean that in some cases, some of these species, they have to be around humans to survive. And that's one of the things that's true for dogs. They don't have to be pets. In fact, the majority of the world's dogs are not pets. They're free living scavengers, but they're around human civilizations. So they're considered obligatory symbiotes, like they utilize human spaces. But they're different inherently in that way. That said, there is somewhat of a continuum. So, dogs can crossbreed with wild canids. And when we look at some of the other species that have been domesticated for shorter spans of time, we, in some cases, see more genetic variability. And so sometimes it's hard to draw that firm line in the sand. There are some birds that are genetically domesticated, but not all birds are. And so, and how much do we know about any given bird that we might personally have in our home? And I think as individual owners, that's something that would be part of that, developing that understanding. That might be a good thing for people to be more aware of. But I think as a general practice, we aren't always aware of that sort of the evolutionary history of the animals that we have or their needs. And so, yeah, I think on the domestication side, it's not always a clear line. But I think that, no matter what animal we might have or be interacting with, whether it's genetically domesticated or not, if we're taking responsibility for caring for that animal, it's sort of on us to deeply understand what its needs are. And that includes some background about that history. So we know how best to meet their needs. And in some cases, that might mean providing it with more experiences that are relevant to sort of its natural circumstances. And that applies, that need for enrichment applies across a whole wide range of species, including some of our smaller or less commonly talked about animals like reptiles and amphibians and fish and birds. We need to think about those things for those other species as well. A common theme, whether we're talking about an animal that's domesticated or not, is so often we sort of take for granted the ability to bring another species into our house and have it live with us. And we don't necessarily think through what it means, the responsibility that it means, the changes to our lives that it's going to mean. I mean, it's a lot to take another animal into your home and provide care for it. And to do that right and to do that well takes time, it takes resources, it takes energy, mental energy. Sometimes it takes a lot of help. And I think one of the more tragic things about, people choosing to care for wildlife or wild animal species for which there may not be resources readily available in the way that there is like domesticated species, is that oftentimes the people who take these animals into their home, they likely shouldn't have done it in the first place, but if they have, they may not be equipped to then care for that animal. Those animals grow up and they become something those people can't take care of, and then their long-term prognosis is very poor. And I think that's another thing to think about, is that a lot of those animals that get taken into homes at a young age when they're cute and cuddly and manageable become dangerous or aggressive or start exhibiting their natural species typical behavior through no fault of their own. And then they can't remain in that home. And then what happens to them? And we should ask the same questions too, though, of domesticated animals, because oftentimes, we do the same with them. It's just often a little bit easier to manage some of their challenges, but not always. And so, asking those questions early on can save a lot of people and a lot of animals some really difficult decisions and outcomes in the end.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's partly why I think your work is so critical and so important. And it's exciting to see and to read what you're doing. Thank you so much for your work. And thank you for sharing it with us today. I really appreciate it. It's been fascinating and a lot of food for thought. So we'll keep looking out for you. And thank you so much.
Yeah, happy to chat with you. And thank you again for having me.
Hey, so we're back with the takeaway. Such a great conversation.
Yeah.
She's so smart.
She is very smart.
And I think one of my last points that actually I just want to start with was how deeply she cares about the experience of domesticated animals. Mm-hmm. I find that her work based in science, which traditionally, and it's changing for sure, but the fact that her care and her empathy and her combined with her science and her research is so refreshing. And I just love how focused she is on the domesticated animal experience.
Yeah.
So we're secondary to me, although she's very much looking at the bond and the interaction. I just love that.
No, and it's, I think, super interesting because I've never really heard about anyone talking about that before. We talk about, wild animals or, the ways that we're intervening with animals that we come in contact with from the wild a lot more.
Yeah.
But just the fact that, have we actually ever talked about how is the experience for your dog living in your house?
Right.
It matters what their experience is, and that it's cool that there's going to be there's scientific data to back up the fact that it matters. Mm-hmm. That's very cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. It's exciting. The one thing too I loved is that she's changed the language a little bit, and she uses the word. I think in the interview I might have referred to it as. I don't remember what I said, but I think she uses the term caretaker versus owner.
Yeah.
And again, like, we know how important language is, and just changing the language of that automatically sets your perspective to, caretaker or companion. There's an exchange there, and it's again, taking the focus away from owner or property and looking at this animal that's in your home, and it gives that animal agency, and it gives it just a different depth. It's on par more than it is I own you.
Yeah, it's much more level than you're here for me. It's just that it's the power dynamic shifts when you say caretaker.
Yeah, and I think you had said too, it really shifts it into a different level of respect.
Yeah,
and it sort of means, I have to sort of be accountable more. If I'm caring for this being, it's a different thing where I own a dog and it lives outside on a chain, or I own a dog and it does this, or a cat. I just thought that was a really important detail that changes a lot of perspective.
It definitely, and it gives verbiage to something that I think a lot of us do think about.
It gives language to the experience. The other thing I really loved our conversation about captive wildlife and what does that mean. She defines domesticated. So she defines the domesticated animal as one that is genetically different from their wildlife relatives. And a domesticated animal is not just one living in our homes, but an animal that has over time undergone genetic changes, which I thought was fascinating.
So fascinating.
I'd never known that, like, there's a genetic difference, and that's what, because I was even talking about the birds things. She's like, well, there actually are domesticated birds, and And that just went into that whole conversation, which I thought was so interesting. And just because it lives in your home doesn't mean it's domesticated.
Right.
And then obviously you guys, heard that whole conversation, which I loved. But I just thought that was really interesting and it makes sense. It's like cows are domesticated. They do certain things now, and horses do certain things now, and dogs, definitely looking at dogs versus wolves, which she talked about, do certain things that are different. But I just thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, just a totally something that we would never have even thought about or had the ability, like just her giving words to that was like, oh, yeah, just because I put it in my house doesn't mean it's a domestic animal.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have really good intentions about bringing wildlife into their homes, and yet her perspective was, but what is the benefit to them and their quality of life, but even their their whole life experience. And I think I have a friend whose little girl is very much, she wants a lot of different wildlife in her home, but she does her research and she puts together like a little presentation to her parents and says, this is what they need, this is what I can do, this is how it's going to work. And, whether you agree with that or not, she's consciously, that's what we're asking. Can we just be more conscious of what you're inviting into your home? And then obviously, it goes down the rabbit hole of what you should never have in your home. But but I just really, I like that.
Mindfulness and
again,
respect.
let's be very mindful and very respectful and come from their perspective. And then again, too, just talking about how her work translates then into conservation and what is mutually beneficial for us and wildlife. And I think her work makes us more mindful of species that extend beyond our homes, is what she said. And if we can understand better, which I think we've talked about many times on this podcast, if we can understand better animals in nature, then we can serve them better. Right. And then we don't have to be afraid of them. And it's back to like the human-wolf conflict and all of the human-wildlife conflict. I just think her work definitely translates into conservation. The dogs and the cats that we have in our homes, all the way out to, the whales in the ocean and giraffes in the Serengeti and all of these animals that we create a lot of conflict with by lack of understanding. And I just think it's an incredible thing to hear about her research, to focus away from us and onto them. I think is a really beautiful thing, and it's exciting.
Yeah, and that's why all these scientists are so fascinating to talk to, I think, because with the benefit of their knowledge, it empowers us to act more responsibly.
Yep, absolutely, and that's the point. Be accountable, be responsible.
Yeah.
So, great interview with Dr. Udell. Thanks so much to her again. You can find her website, the Human Animal Interaction Lab, at thehumananimalbond.com, and check her out. And again, if you could please follow, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts, it really helps a little independent podcast like Kindred get into the phones and ears of our future listeners. And also, don't forget to head to our website, kindredpodcast.co, for episode notes, merch, and more. And again, all our links can be found in the show notes below. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Tat.
Okay.
Bye.
Lots of love. Kindred is hosted by me and my sister Jen. Produced by Kat Gaddy and myself. Sound production and editing by Dan Cooper. Original music by Ellie Grace. And our Kindred artwork was created by Lindsay Coffin. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And feel free to contact us through our website at kindredpodcast.co, where you can also find links to our socials, Patreon page, and show notes.